Okay, guys, we're going to get started. Let me tell you where we ended off. We covered a lot of ground. We went from 29A2 to 29B2, which was quite amazing.
Okay.
Okay. And I think that was very, very good progress from you guys. I really applaud you very much. Um, so what point we are at the moment is as follows, is that um, we were discussing about um, when you're liable for hazardous objects, when you're not liable for hazardous objects, etc. So this is what we said. We said, look, at the end of the day, this Amoraic dispute resembles a Tanaic dispute. It's nothing new here, okay? So initially the dispute was with, it's with Rabbi Meir, and you've got Rabbi Yehuda, who agrees with the sages, and that's the Tanaic view. Then the Amoraic view is Rav Yochanan and Rav Eliezer, okay? So eventually what we say is, hang on, if this is mirroring each other, then should we say that the Mishnah about one who rules you liable for ownerless objects agrees with Rabbi Meir? And maybe the one who rules that you're not liable for ownerless objects agree with Rav Yehuda and the sages, because Rav Yehuda and the sages are of the same opinion. Obviously, Rav Yehuda, for some reason, is mentioned specifically. I don't know if he came before some of the other sages or he just led the discussion as Rabbi Meir's contemporary. Okay, so this is what we're saying, is it wasn't necessarily the case. Why? It says, so, you could say as far as Rabbi Meir is concerned, everybody agrees that the owner is liable. Well, that makes sense. Why? Because, guys, look where Rabbi Meir holds a person liable. If he's having a pitch on his shoulders and from a manufacturing default, that thing disintegrates, he holds you liable. If you fall and you're not looking where you're going, he holds you liable. The Gemara is not quite happy with Rabbi and Abaya's explanation that they'd be held, Rabbi Meir would hold somebody liable with a manufacturing default, because that could be an unavoidable accident. But if at the very least at the case where he stumbles and falls, Rabbi Meir says he's negligent because he didn't look where he was going. And most certainly, if that's considered by the sages and Rav Yehuda as being an unavoidable accident, then certainly, when somebody creates a pit in the public domain and declares it ownerless, for sure, Rabbi Meir says they're responsible. There's no question. If he holds one liable for even more lenient things of his generation. Does that make sense, Gav? Kev? Yeah. Fine. So now we're saying, and if you will say that he's not liable, does it automatically mean he agrees with the sages? And we're going to say, well, not necessarily. There are those that rule that the owner is not liable, agree with the sages without qualification. So what do we mean without qualification? Quite simply, that statement meant that there's a classic case in the Torah where you have a person that has a premises, and then in that particular case, he doesn't make his payments, or he lets the public use it because he's lost use of the property, or he declares it ownerless, the property. And in that particular case, he's kept onto the swimming pool, the pit, or whatever. In that case, he's liable because it's a hazard that he created, and therefore, at the point where he creates anything in the public domain that's ownerless, he's not liable for it. He's only liable in this case because the thing that was on his premises, like the swimming pool, he still maintains ownership, and therefore, from inference, anything ownerless, he's not responsible for. Okay, and that's without qualification. Those are people that agree that you're not liable for ownerless objects in the public domain without qualification. What do we mean when it says with qualification? Well, we're saying then the sages agree with Rabbi Yehuda, because there was a issue where, although Rav Yehuda say you're not liable in the public domain, there is a statement of Rav Yochanan's view of Rav Yehuda, which is slightly different. What does Rav Yochanan say about Rav Yehuda? He said, listen, ordinarily, Rav Yehuda and the sages would hold somebody liable for a pit that is ownerless in the public domain that causes damage. Because why? It's not an unavoidable accident. You weren't dopey. You created a pit in the public domain. Therefore, it was purposeful. It was negligent. It was irresponsible. And you're liable. In this case where you accidentally stumble, Rav Yochanan interprets Rav Yehuda as saying, in this case only, through an unavoidable accident, if you then declare it ownerless, it's not your responsibility. Rabbi Meir says, okay, it was an accident, whatever. You're going to pay at the time of the fall if it creates damage because you stumbled by accident. And after the fall, if you don't clean it up in time, guess what? You're responsible because you created injury unnecessarily. So those are the two opinions. So when we say with qualification, it means that you're not responsible for an ownerless hazard in the public domain, only in the case where it was due to an unavoidable accident. So that's Rav Yochanan's explanation of Rabbi Yehuda. Fine. I hope that explanation on the previous 2 pages helped as a quicker. Did you guys remember it, or was the refresher helpful?
No, it helps a lot.
Yeah, it did help. I do remember, yeah.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Just reinforce.
When you guys,
Damon,
when you went through it, we can see we knew, we know most of it.
So regardless of the fact that the picture has a manufacturing defect, you've got to clean up it makes no difference. I mean, it's...
Well, you know what? That's what Rabba and Abaya say, that Rabbi Meir would say. Say, listen, we accept the fact that it's not your fault, but why should somebody else get injured? So I can see that.
Yeah, you've got to just clean up your mess at the end of the day, bottom line.
Yeah, and if it injures somebody and you don't,
yeah, of course,
you should.
It was in your possession. It was you were the last. You were the last person in whose possession it was. So
I agree. I agree with you. So I can see that point of view completely, Kevin. So then those that say that you're responsible for an ownerless pit in the public domain, okay, because you created a hazard, say this because that is the one Torah interpretation of the verse that says if you create a hazard in the public domain, you're responsible. The other one uses this case of your own premises that you've relinquished to the public, and then you kept the swimming pool part. Does that make sense? Those are the two interpretations of where we get pit from. So depending where you're holding, that would tell you if you're responsible for an ownerless pit or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Gav? Very straightforward. Yeah, it does. All right. Now we're going to get into the Amoraic dispute. Okay, this is where it's going to get a little tricky. So we're now on 29b2. And it says the Gemara attempts to identify the proponent of each view. What do we mean the proponent by each view? It's because it says there was Rav Yochanan and Rav Elazar. So it said one said that one is liable for ownerless hazard in the public domain, and the other one said you're not liable. But at the moment, from this Amoraim, we don't know who says what. So now we're going to investigate that. Does Rav Yochanan say he's liable, he's not liable for ownerless hazard? Or does Rav Elazar said one is liable or not liable? Obviously, they're on different points of view because they wouldn't bring two opinions of the same point of view. But only when this particular daf finishes will we know. So let's unpack. Okay. So the Gemara attempts to identify the proponent of each view. It can be determined that Rav Elazar is the one who said that he is liable. For Rav Elazar said in the name of Rav Yishmael. Okay. Just remember, Rav Elazar said in the name of Rav Yishmael. This will be a clue later on. There are two things that are actually not in a person's possession, but Scripture treats them as though they were in his possession. So what are we talking about here? We'll find out now. They are a pit that is dug in the public domain and chametz after 6 hours. So I'm going to repeat this again. Rav Elazar said in the name of Rav Yishmael, there are two things that are actually not in a person's possession, but Scripture treats them as though they were in his possession. So what does this mean? Well, it means that the Torah replaces responsibility upon the person as if the item in question did belong to him. So for example, if we say the pit in the public domain, If I create a hazard in the public domain and I dig a pit, right? I don't own the pit because I don't own the ownerless ground in the public domain. But since I'm the one that dug the pit, I'm responsible as if I did own it. So that's the first thing Rav Elazar says in the name of Rav Yishmael. Are you with me?
Yeah.
That a person that dug a pit, even though he doesn't own the pit, it's as if he owns it in terms of his responsibility. And the second thing is chametz after 6 hours. So what do we mean chametz after 6 hours? Just on a side note.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guys, I don't know if you know this, but in Shmot chapter 13, verse 7,
Yeah.
it says that you can't have any chametz that can be in your possession. Okay? So what do we mean? So say the 14th of Nisan is happening that night. During the day afternoon, you can't own any chametz. You make a declaration, you burn your chametz, and it becomes ownerless. Okay? So therefore, you don't own it. So what does it mean you're responsible for it if you don't own it? It means that ownership means that you've got the right to benefit from it. So why do we declare it ownerless? Is that you're not allowed to even benefit from chametz. You can't even give I remember I had to give I sold Amadeus, my bearded dragon, during Pesach. Because her food is chametz, and I couldn't benefit by feeding my pet chametz. Now, there's no alternative food. It comes from America or Australia, wherever this food comes from. It's the price of heroin a gram. It's expensive. So I wasn't going to shop around. I just sold the dragon. Pity they sold it back to me. Anyway, be that as it may, I couldn't benefit from the chametz. So in that case, that's what we talk about, having no possession of it. Why? Because when you sell it, you can't benefit. That's one of the reasons why we sell it. Okay? So that's number one, and you sell it by the afternoon. Then there's another commandment which says no chametz may be seen in your possession. So that's chapter 13, verse 7, and no leaven may be found in your houses. That's chapter 12, verse 19. That's by Rashi. So you can't derive any benefit, and generally, if you don't own something, you can't derive a benefit. Are you with me, Gav? If a person has a house, you're either renting that house or you own it. So if you're renting a house, you've got the benefit of, for example, staying in a house, but you cannot make structural changes. You've only got that benefit if you own the house. So both one's pit and one's chametz, you don't own it, and you don't derive benefit from it technically, but you're responsible for it. Why? Because if that chametz that you sold, you consume, that's kares. That is kares. You're not allowed to get benefit from it. You're certainly not allowed to consume it. So this is what Rav Elazar said in the name of Rav Yishmael. So evidently, Rav Elazar maintains that one is responsible for a pit he digs in the public domain. This is the proof of it. Although such a pit is ownerless. Hence, Rav Elazar must be the one who said that one is responsible for hazardous objects he declared ownerless. That's what it says in the Gemara. Indeed, from here, it can be determined that this is Rav Elazar's view. Okay, so what it's trying to determine is saying, listen, whose view is it that one is responsible for a pit in the public domain? Is it Rav Yochanan or Rav Elazar? So it's using this proof to say Rav Elazar is saying both your pit and your chametz, even though you don't own it, you're responsible for it as if you did own it. So this is a proof seemingly, so far, that Rav Elazar holds one responsible for an ownerless hazard in the public domain. Are you guys all up to date with me so far?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it doesn't make it, from his perspective, it doesn't make a difference if you own it or you don't own it. It's the same.
Correct. But this is the proof with chametz and the pit
Yeah, it's a good proof.
discussion. So it's a good proof so far.
So far.
But the Gemara challenges and it says, hang on, but did Rav Elazar really say this? Why? Rav Elazar said exactly the opposite. For we learned in the Mishnah, okay, and this is a Mishnah in 30a. It's actually the second Mishnah in 30a. It's not the first one, guys. It's in 30a4. Okay, it's not in 30a1, by the way. Rav Elazar said in the Mishnah, if one turns over dung in the public domain, and then another person was damaged by it, the person who is turning it over is liable to pay for his damage. Okay? So do you want me to repeat this, guys?
Can you say that again?
I'm okay.
Okay. So there's a second Mishnah in the 30th daf that talks about your dung as a hazard. Okay? So what it's saying here is, we learned in the Mishnah in 30a, and this is the exact wording of the Mishnah. If one turns over dung in the public domain, and yet another person was damaged by it, the person who was turning it over is liable for his damage. And Rav Elazar said in the explanation of this Mishnah, they taught that he's liable only when he intended to acquire the dung. But where he did not intend to acquire it, he is not liable. So now this seems to be proof that Rav Elazar maintains that a person is not responsible for a hazard he left in the public domain unless he owns it. So far it seems that the one who declares his hazards ownerless is not liable. So this almost contradicts what we learned from Rav Elazar before. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah. Sort of.
Okay.
Because he paturs, people are patur, so he's making people liable. Is that what you're saying?
So Arthur, what do you mean sort of? Tell me what you don't understand. I'm listening.
No, I'm a bit confused because I'm trying to figure out. Okay, say it again slowly and let me see if I get it, because I mean, okay, I'll tell you what I know. What he's saying is, if there's manure lying in the ground, the one that turns it over is the one that's responsible for the damages, not the guy who originally laid it there.
No. The Mishnah is saying that.
Okay.
The Mishnah is saying.
It's the Mishnah saying
read it again, and then I'll read Rav Elazar's comment on it. Okay. So in the Gemara it says we learned in the Mishnah.
Yeah.
So just assume that the Mishnah is reading this. We haven't got to Rav Elazar yet. The Mishnah says,
Okay.
if one turns over dung in the public domain and then another person was damaged by it, the person who was turning it over is liable to pay for his damage. That's what the Mishnah says.
Okay.
And you're right to ask of. And Rav Elazar said in explanation of this Mishnah that they taught he only when intended to acquire the dung, but where he did not intend to acquire it, he is not liable.
So are you saying
so therefore,
okay, Karen?
No. So I'm saying the Mishnah says you're liable. If you're
So
turning over dung,
acquiring the dung, you mean to actually purchase the dung or use the dung? Is everything by acquire? Or
okay, so hang on, before we even get to what acquire means, let's just clarify one thing. The Mishnah says you pick up dung, you turn it over, anybody gets injured, you're liable.
Okay, got that.
Rav Elazar said it's not true. Only if you acquired the dung means that you're liable in that particular case. Right, now that we understand that, I'm going to say what acquire means now. But the bottom line is, acquire means it's not ownerless anymore. It's yours.
So you decide to use it for your benefit.
Yes. So in other words, when it's of value to you and use, it doesn't mean you have to pay for the dung. We pay for compost today for plants and nutrients or whatever, but he had some horses, he had some plants at home, tomato patches or whatever, and he thought this is prime manure, and he doesn't have horses at home, and he thought, I'm going to take some of the dung and take it back with me or whatever. So the minute you see something of value, it's no longer ownerless, and therefore you're liable.
So you become liable for all of it, not just the piece that you took.
No, well, whatever causes the damage, Art, that's not the point. The point of it is, if you don't look at the dung twice and it's not of value to you, and you've played around with it, then that's known as ownerless dung. Okay. It's got no value to you. If you've played around and you're going to take some of it, or you fancy the dung, or you think it's high value dung, or whatever it is, in that case, you've acquired it, whatever object it is.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? So when you acquire it, it's owned by you. And therefore, there's a different level of responsibility. Now it goes from board to shore.
Okay.
It's your property. So therefore, the Mishnah says, listen, you found dung in the public domain. The minute you toy with it and somebody gets injured, it's your fault, you're liable. Rav Elazar said it's not true. Only if you intend to acquire it. meaning that you've gained some affection for it, I don't know if you're going to use it or what, that in that case, it's yours. And only when you acquire it are you responsible for it. Therefore, by him saying that, it's proving that you're not liable to pay if it's ownerless. This contradicts his previous statement.
Yeah, that's what's throwing everyone.
In other words, if you're on track, Arthur, it means you're confused. If you know what's going on, it means you're not on track.
Okay.
How do you prove
Now-
intention? Maybe he's playing with it and looking at it doesn't, and how do you know he
Yeah,
intended to acquire it? Maybe
Okay,
he's just admiring it.
That's a great question. That's a great question. So the thing of it is, we're going to determine what, Kev? How's it?
I mean, I had to put my charger in. Sorry, that's all.
So the first thing is, what is meaning by acquiring? Well, the very fact that you're picking it up, you're creating.
Okay.
Pick it
Kenya.
up no, if you pick it up more than 3 tefachim, it means you've done hagba. It means you've Kenyan, you've acquired it. So there has to be an act. In other words, if I see a 50 Rand note on the floor, I can look at it all day. It ain't mine. When I put it in my pocket, it's mine. That's acquisition. So when you lift it up above the ground past a certain height, you've then acquired it. Whether or not you decide to keep it or not, that's the definition in learning Bava Metzia of acquisition. If it's more than 3 tefachim. So that's known as hagba. You lift it up or you grab it like in an animal. That's an act of acquisition. So that would answer your question, Kevin. But Arthur, what I'm saying is you're not following. You need to do a bit more chazorah, because it's saying that if Rav Elazar is contradicting the Mishnah and saying you're not liable only if you've acquired it or you own the dung, then you're liable. It means to say he doesn't hold you liable on this object, like the Mishnah. Previously, it said he's liable for his pit. He was quoting Rav Yishmael, and he said for pit and chametz, even if you don't own it, you're liable and responsible for it. Here it's saying you're not liable because you don't own the dung. So we're seeing a contradiction.
Okay. Okay, I got that.
Arthur, you love.
No, I got that. I understand that part because I remember the last part there. Okay, so what do we do about the contradiction?
Fine, as long as you're confused, then you're on track. That's good.
Because
More confused than you were before.
Opposite.
You're meant to be confused at this point because we're seeing a contradiction. All I want you to do is follow. I'm going to get to the answer now. But you should see that there is a contradiction between what he said before and what he's saying now.
Okay.
Is everybody confused? I hope it's yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and they
Exactly, yeah.
dichotomy,
All right, so
the dichotomy of each other. I don't know, the exact opposite.
Exactly. So let's go on and let's get clarity. So the Gemara answers the fact. So firstly, one of the things I want to address with you is that you found ownerless dung in the public domain. He raised it, turned it over, and put it down, shifting it from one spot to another. That's what Rashi says. That's the exact thing that happened. Guys, are you with me?
Yep.
Okay, it's straightforward.
He made a Kenyan.
We're going to find it out now, but in the meantime, just that the dung's ownerless, public domain, he raised it, turned it over, and put it down, shifting it from one spot to another. The Kenyan part is a different issue. That's according to Rav Elazar, that he'd have to acquire it in order to be liable. But in the meantime, let's just focus on Rashi and not jump ahead and say, ownerless dung, this new oak picked it up, turned it over, changed it from one spot to another. Fine. And the Mishnah said he's liable even though the dung is ownerless if it hurts somebody. Fine. We get that now. Now, you should have a problem because if Rav Elazar says that one is liable, you should have a problem, and this should already give you a bit of a clue, right? Because now we've got this contradiction with Rav Elazar. And who's the contradicting opinion? Is Rav Yochanan. But you remember Rav Yochanan quoted Rav Yehuda before. And listen, you are liable for an ownerless object in the public domain in any circumstance where it injures, except if the person stumbled, broke his pitcher, and on an unavoidable mishap, declared it ownerless and then left it. But for any other reason, he was saying Rav Yehuda and the sages would hold that person liable for an ownerless object that damages in the public domain. So this should already give you a clue from what we learned before of Rav Yochanan, that he holds somebody liable for an ownerless object in the public domain. I'm just giving you a clue, guys. We already covered this. So what I'm saying is, if you do the right chazorah, these questions start to percolate in your mind. All right, let's just go on and solve this issue. So the Gemara answers that, in fact, Rav Elazar rules that one who declares his hazardous objects ownerless is liable, as it asserted originally, but the case involving the dung is an exception for the following reason. Rav Ada bar Ahava said that Rav Elazar maintains that the Mishnah speaks of a case where he put the dung back in its original position. Hence, he is not liable unless he acquires it, because the hazard was not created through his actions. Okay? So in other words, he's got a spade. There's a hazard already. He lifts up the dung, looks at it, thinks no, puts it back, and then he ducks. Now it's ownerless. So he would ordinarily be responsible, but not in this case, because he dumped it where it was. So he didn't create a new hazard. What he merely did is left the same treacherous hazard in the same position. So before he got there, there was a hazard. After he got there, there was a hazard in the same position. And therefore, he's not responsible. He didn't create a new hazard. Does that make sense, guys? He never created anything new. So the previous person that left the dung in that shocking position, I was going to use a different word to illustrate the dungy position. In that particular case, Gavin, the person that created that original hazard should be responsible. If he merely dumped it where that hazard was before, he created nothing new. And that's why in this case of the dung, he's not liable. So it says it's not necessarily a proof that he doesn't hold you liable for an ownerless dung, because you would. If he took the dung, in other words, and put it in a completely new spot, he created a new hazard. Here he just dumped it back where the hazard was originally. The person that created the dung originally is responsible. He created no new hazard. And the proof of this is Ravina said, an analogy to Rav Ada bar Ahava's case is as follows. To what can the matter be compared? It can be compared to one who finds an open pit and covers it, and then uncovers it again. He's not liable for any subsequent damage because he didn't create the pit in the first place, okay? In other words, a person can't be held accountable for an object in the public domain. Look, okay, even according to the opinion that you're responsible for an ownerless hazard, if you didn't create the hazard in the first place, but you have a manhole and the lid is uncovered, and there was a hazard there, and you covered the lid, then you uncovered it again. You didn't add anything new to the hazard. So even those rabbis that would hold you responsible for an ownerless hazard won't hold you responsible in this case, because you created no new damage. That pit was there before you got it. You just rendered it back to its original state. Does everybody follow?
Yeah.
Okay. In other words, he put the obstacle in the public domain, he returned it to the original position. That's according to Rashi. And he never touched the dung in the first place. He just left what was there. If he acquired it, however, he is liable. This is the case. One who owns a hazard entity that is in the public domain is responsible for it regardless of whether it was put there, because it's classified as a shore. So what we're saying is, even if he dumped it in the same position, if he acquired it, it's now his. And therefore, you're responsible for all hazards you create in the public domain, because now it's taken on a new entity.
So,
But
okay.
it doesn't mean that Rav Elazar wouldn't hold him responsible for an ownerless hazard in the public domain. It just means here he left the dung where he found it. He lifted it up. There was dung, lifted it up, didn't like it, put it back. Nothing new created, and therefore it's not necessarily indicative that he's not responsible for his ownerless hazard. All right, let's move on.
Can I ask you a question? Let's say in our town there was like a pile of junk on the floor, and I went there and I saw something. I picked it up. It was nice, one part of it, and I took that one part away. Am I responsible for all the junk that's there, or just the part I took?
No, well, if you took the junk somewhere else,
I just picked up one part,
One piece.
one piece of it, and put it in my pocket. Like let's say there was a pile of junk. The pile of junk was a gold nugget. I picked the gold nugget, but I left the rest.
No, you're not responsible.
Okay.
Because all you did was remove some of the hazard. All right.
Okay.
So basically the analogy, Ravina's analogy is disputed. Okay, because that was Ravina's explanation. Mazutra, okay, so Mazutra, the son of Rav Mari, said to Ravina, the cases alike. In that case, a person who temporarily covers a pit, the first deed, in other words, the person that dug the pit, was not undone. So the one who dug the pit is still responsible for it. Okay, so all he did is, the pit was undug, he put soil on, and then he undug a pit that was already dug. So that was a different issue. The one who dug the pit is still responsible. But in the case of one who moves the dung, the first deed, in other words, the original placing of the dung was undone completely. And therefore, the one who moved the dung should become responsible for it. So this case of moving dung is comparable only to one who finds an open pit, fills it in, and then digs it anew. Where the first deed, in other words, the original digging of the pit is undone, and a new pit becomes his responsibility. So what this particular argument is, okay, Rav Zutra, the son of Rav Mari, is he's saying, listen, I'm not happy with your explanation. It's different. Someone dug a pit, you covered it with a manhole, and then you uncovered it. That's different. That hasn't never went away. The minute you lifted up the dung, okay, the minute you lifted up the dung, you've now rendered that previous hazard disappeared. So the minute you dump the dung back, you've now created a new hazard. He's not happy with the answer. It makes sense what he's saying.
Yeah, it does.
Damon.
Hang on, Kev, hang on. He's saying if you took that spade when you lifted it up originally and going through it out of the public domain, you've actually removed the hazard. The fact that you've decided to dump it back in the same place, you actually removed the hazard, and the minute you've created, thrown it back, you've created a new hazard. It's not like uncovering a manhole and covering it back, where you haven't changed the status of a pit at all. Just give me 1 sec.
That's, you answered my question. That was what I was going to ask you.
Okay. So, having rejected the previous approach, the Gemara offers a different explanation as to Rav Elazar limited the Mishnah to a case in which he acquired the dung. Guys, I've got 3 minutes left, and then I want to do one quick Zoom link where Kevin will teach us. But then we're done.
For like a day, I've only got 5 minutes, says I've got stuff to do. I've got a student soon. Can we? Okay.
Right.
But we'll do it. Okay. We'll do the Zoom link then. Okay. 5 minutes only, Damon.
Kev, we've already lost. Every time you talk, I'm losing more time. I need 3 minutes left. The Gemara challenges this interpretation as well, but what forced Rav Elazar to interpret the Mishnah as referring to a case where he turned over the dung less than 3 tefachim from the ground? This is answering Kevin's question. And to say that the reason why he's liable is that he intended to acquire the dung, but if he did not intend to acquire the dung, he's not liable. So Rav Elazar interprets the Mishnah as referring to a case where he turned over the dung above 3 tefachim from the ground, and that even if he didn't intend to acquire it, he would be liable. So in other words, there's a case here. anything above 3 tefachim is an active acquisition whether you intended or not. That's the first explanation, Kevin, because that's what Kevin was asking, which was a great question. How do we know the guy's intent? Anything above 3 tefachim, he owns it. He's acquired it. That's number one. So he can't claim afterwards he didn't. That was the best question all day. Second point, Kevin, is that the minute he does it above 3 tefachim, it's now considered a new hazard. Not only because he acquired it, but because anything less than 3 tefachim is part of the old structure. Are you with me? Because you're not lifting it high enough that if a car came over it, it wouldn't be affected. Now, when you lift it up enough, somebody can see you lifting it up enough. It's not going to create the whole hazard. So even if you argue that he didn't say whether he acquired it or not, anything above 3 tefachim would make him liable for a new hazard. So the Gemara answers, Rava said that Rav Elazar was bothered by the wording of the Mishnah. Why did the Mishnah say he turned the dung over? Let him say he raised the dung. Surely then one can derive from this that whenever the term he turned something over is used, it means that he did so from below 3 tefachim. So what is the implication of that, Kevin? It's that he didn't in fact own it. It wasn't an effective act of acquisition, and therefore there's if the Mishnah says you're liable, Rav Elazar so far seems to be that he doesn't hold one liable for. It doesn't seem that he holds one liable. Are you with me? That's how we're going to end off. We'll cover more. Yeah.
Surely there have to be witnesses to witness that he lifted it over 3 tefachim for the acquisition. How do you prove it?
So the proving it is, remember with all these Gemara cases, great question, with all these Gemara cases, these are just perfect cases if you have the right witnesses and everybody.
Okay.
So what the Gemara ended off was saying that Rav Elazar does hold one responsible, it would seem, for an ownerless pit. So it's not a contradiction, because in this particular case, he never created the hazard in the first place, and that's why Rav Elazar says he's not liable for it, because he never acquired it above 3 tefachim, and if he dumped it where he found it, then there was nothing new he created, according to Ravina. So in that particular case, that doesn't testify that he doesn't hold one unaccountable for an ownerless object. Rather, he does hold one accountable. He just doesn't hold one accountable in the case of a dung, because he wasn't the one that created the hazard, and he clearly didn't lift it above 3 tefachim, because the Mishnah said he just turned over the spade. So therefore, it wasn't his hazard to create. Somebody else who originally created that dung mess is responsible for it. So then the Gemara reasserts itself. So Rav Elazar now does hold someone responsible, it would seem, so far, for a ownerless hazard. All right, so then, right, Kev, teach us.
Okay, so it's a negative commandment for eat during work or produce that grows from the ground, but only at the end of the work. What? Okay. It's a negative commandment for laborer. Okay, so I'll read it out. Okay. A negative commandment for a laborer, you can't stop him from eating on the produce that he works with during working hours, and restrict him to only eating it at the end of working hours. It's a negative commandment that a laborer is not to take away in his hand any of the produce with which he has worked, nor is he to take more than what he eats and give to others.
Okay, that's clear.
And it says in Scripture, you shall not put any of your vessel. You should not put any in your vessel. This is in effect okay. So you can't take, basically. I think that's unless you get permission. It doesn't belong to you. It's not your property.
Okay, it makes sense.
Okay, it's a negative commandment not to prevent an animal from eating during its work. You shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. That's from Devarim. It is all one. It is all one whether it is an ox or any domestic or untamed animal, and it is all one whether it is during treading out the grain or during any labors with soil-grown produce, whether it has been cut or it is attached to the soil, whether one has muzzled it during the work or has muzzled it beforehand, or he has restrained it with his voice, and thus he did work with it while it was restrained. He would thus violate this prohibition. Even if it was a heathen's animal, he would be punishable. So you have to let an animal eat, not to prevent an animal.
Okay.
You can't, that's it, because it needs the energy, So I think, and it just makes it confuses you that it has a double negative. Okay, let's do one more.
Yeah.
It's a negative commandment that a person chances upon a bird's nest before him. He is not to take the mother bird with the young. This is called shikun. I'll say it in Hebrew. It's called, this is, what is it called? Did you say? So if you need if you want to take the chicks, I'll read it now. You must ensure that the mother goes away because it's insensitive and can cause anguish. So it says here, Sheloach hakan, I think they call it in Hebrew. Okay. In scripture, if a bird's nest chances, if a bird's nest chances to be, you shall not take the mother with the young. This is Devarim. Okay, that's basically, I mean, I've done this before. Sheluach hakan. Sheluach, to send away, or to send, like mishloach, like shaliach. Hakan, from the place. Kan and Paul is like place. Arthur probably knows it from you, Gavin. Damon, I don't know if you know, there's, in Hebrew, you get two words for place. For here, Paul or kan. So sheluach hakan, to send it from this place, the mother bird, because it's basically it's showing sensitivity, even if you want the chicks, because otherwise the mother will eventually come back. So you can actually do that, and we actually were witness to this. Eli Chartevitz and myself, and his cousin John Chartevitz. I don't know if you know him, guys.
I do.
Who lives near the Kollel, and there happened to be we were there for Chol Hamoed Sukkot. And there happened to be a mother bird with the chicks in the one tree. So Eli did the mitzvah. He chased it away and took the chicks. I don't know what he did with them. But John let him do it. Maybe he put them back. He was just doing the mitzvah. I don't know. You don't have to do anything with them, but maybe he wanted to play with them and put them back. So I don't think he shechted them, but he actually performed this mitzvah.
You might have scrambled them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, the chicks, you mean? They were, yeah.
Well, are they not eggs or they chicks?
No, the chicks are the little the hatchlings, the little baby birds. If you want them, you chase the mother bird away from the nest.
Yeah,
have you heard that one before, Arthur?
Yeah.
Arthur? Oh, no, he's on his bike. You see, he's looking up at the trees, Damon. You see, he's trying to see if there are chicks in the trees there. He can chase the mother bird away.
I see you. Listen, it's now time in.
No, I'm bird watching, guys. I'm bird watching.
Okay.
Well, at least you know the rules now for bird watching. So you.
Listen, we have to get ready to go to Mincha Maariv because it's about 10 minutes time. But Kevin, you made it very, very clear. You taught us two things. The one thing of it is a comparison between an animal, a working animal, and a worker employee. That an employee is not allowed to take advantage during the day and give the produce of his employer to other people and share. And he's allowed a small portion, but it shouldn't interfere with his work. Whereas an animal, you have to give it the sustenance, even if it stops to eat. And then the chasing away of the mother before you attach the hatchling. So you taught us well. Thank you, Kevin, very, very much. I really
Scott, thanks to you, teacher. You also taught us well.
Yeah.
thanks,
A
man.
nice summary there at the end. Well done.
It wasn't the pits. The shirim are not about. They're not the pits, eh?
No, no. Thanks.
Arthur, we'll see you tomorrow, guys.